The Arizona sun has a way of baking the hope out of a man, leaving nothing but a dry husk of memory and obligation. For Jonah Hale, that husk was his ranch, a patch of cracked earth and sorrow just outside Redemption Creek. A year had passed since cholera stole his wife, Eliza, but her grave on the hill was still the only part of the land he tended with any care. He was riding the dry arroyo, his Winchester heavy across his lap, hunting for anything that might spare him from butchering his last steer, when the smell hit him. It wasn't the clean scent of juniper or the dry musk of dust. It was the greasy, thick smell of slaughter. And beneath it, the silence of the dead. Jonah Hale crested the rocky ridge, his knuckles white on the worn leather of his reins. The high desert air, usually thin and sharp, was choked with a column of oily black smoke that stained the cloudless sky. It was coming from the narrow pass that led to the Verde River, a shortcut travelers seldom used unless they were in a hurry, or lost. He spurred his weary bay, dusty, into a cautious trot. Jonah was not a man moved by curiosity. Grief had burned that clean out of him. But this was different. This was an intrusion. The smoke was a vulgar blot on the landscape of his solitude. As he got closer, the silence became profound. No birds called, no insects chirped. There was only the crackle of dying flames and the sick sweet stench of burnt fat and something metallic, like a blacksmith's forge doused in blood. He dismounted at the mouth of the pass, tethering Dusty to a skeletal mesquite. He pulled the Winchester 1873 from its scabbard, the comforting weight of the oiled steel a grim necessity in this land. He moved forward on foot, his worn boots making no sound on the sandy soil. The sight that greeted him stole the breath from his lungs. It was a massacre. 2 large Conestoga wagons, the kind families used to haul their entire lives across the plains, were reduced to smoking skeletons. A third, smaller wagon, a heavy-duty mud wagon, built for speed and security, was splintered on its side, its wheels pointing to the sky like the hands of a broken clock. The bodies were everywhere. They were not settlers. Jonah saw that immediately. The men were dressed in sober black suits, now torn and blooded. He counted at least 10 of them, scattered around the wagons in postures of defense. They had died hard. Their holsters were empty, and the ground was littered with brass casings from heavy-caliber rifles, not the typical scatterguns of pioneers. He saw a glint of metal near one man, a Star revolver, a powerful and expensive weapon. This was a professional fight. He saw the others then. A woman, her fine dress inappropriate for the trail, was slumped against a scorched wagon wheel, her eyes open to the harsh sun. A man in a driver's coat was draped over the wagon tongue, his chest a ruin. Jonah felt the old familiar coldness seep into his bones. Death was his constant neighbor, but this was a visitation. This was an execution. He moved through the wreckage, his gaze clinical, looking for... he didn't know what. Supplies? Answers? He noted what wasn't there. The teams of mules or horses were gone, but the personal trunks were burst open, their contents, fine silks, leather-bound books, silver-backed hairbrushes, were scattered and trampled, but not taken. The attackers hadn't been simple highwaymen. They weren't after plunder. They were after this. He found the child's doll near the overturned mud wagon. It was porcelain, with delicate, painted-on eyelashes and a blue silk dress. It was untouched, lying face down in the bloody dust. Jonah's hand, calloused and scarred, hesitated above it. He felt a sudden, sharp pain behind his ribs, a memory of Eliza talking about the nursery they would one day build. He recoiled, turning away from the doll as if it were a coiled rattler. He was about to leave. This was a matter for the sheriff in Redemption Creek, Elias Cobb, a man who preferred his authority to remain purely theoretical. This was trouble Jonah could not afford. His ranch was failing. The note on his land, held by Bartholomew Drummond, was coming due. He had no time for the dead. That's when he heard it. A cough. It was thin, a wet, desperate sound, like a drowning bird. Jonah froze. He scanned the carnage. Nothing moved but the flames. He waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. It came again, from a shallow wash 20 yards away, hidden by a tangle of greasewood. He moved toward the sound, his rifle ready. He parted the brittle branches. There, half buried in the sand, was a woman. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was matted with blood and dirt. She was wearing what might have been a simple traveling dress, but the fabric was torn, revealing a shoulder wound that was a dark, angry mess. Her face was pale as bleached bone, her lips cracked and blue. She was dying. Her eyes fluttered open as his shadow fell over her. They were a startling, deep blue, and for a moment they were sharp with terror. She flinched, trying to pull away, but the movement sent a spasm of agony through her. "Easy, Mum," Jonah said, his voice rough from disuse. "Easy." He knelt, checking her wound. It was a bullet, lodged deep. She was burning with fever. He looked back at the smoking ruins, at the lifeless doll. He looked at the woman. He was a man teetering on the edge of ruin, with barely enough food for himself, holding a note that would make him homeless by the first snow. He had no room for this, no room for the living, any more than he had for the dead. Eliza's face flashed in his mind. "You're a good man, Jonah Hale," she used to whisper. He cursed, low and bitter. "Good don't pay the bills, Liza," he muttered to the empty sky. But he couldn't leave her. That last ember of the man he had been, the man Eliza had loved, wouldn't allow it. With a grunt, he holstered his Winchester and carefully, gently, slid his arms beneath the wounded woman. She weighed almost nothing. She moaned, a soft, desperate sound, and her head lolled against his chest. "Just hold on," Jonah said, more to himself than to her. He carried her out of the valley of ash, away from the slaughter, and began the slow, agonizing walk back to his horse. He didn't look back. He was a struggling widower, a man at the end of his rope, and he was carrying a lone survivor. He was unaware that his act of desperate, begrudging mercy had just sealed his fate, binding him to a secret that would bring the entire, violent weight of the outside world down upon his desolate doorstep. He was carrying a Baroness. The journey back to the ranch was a slow torture. The woman, who Jonah had simply begun to call her in his mind, drifted in and out of a ragged consciousness. Twice he had to stop and dribble water from his canteen onto her cracked lips. By the time he reached his cabin, the sun was a bloody smear in the west, and his own shoulders ached from the unaccustomed burden. He kicked open the door to his one-room cabin. The air inside was stale, smelling of old wood smoke, leather, and the lingering, phantom scent of Eliza's dried herbs that still hung from the rafters. It was a place of profound emptiness. He laid the woman on his own cot, the only bed in the house. The straw mattress rustled in protest. Her fever was raging. He lit the kerosene lamp, the yellow glow casting deep shadows on her pale, aristocratic features. Even covered in grime and blood, there was a refinement to her face, a high brow, a straight nose, a jawline with no hint of the prairie's hard, bitten practicality. "Damnation," he whispered. He was no doctor. Eliza had been the healer, but he'd seen enough wounds in his time. He stoked the embers in the hearth, set a pot of water to boil, and ripped one of Eliza's last good linen sheets into bandages. He paused, his hand crushing the fabric. It felt like another betrayal, using her things for this stranger. But the woman groaned, a sound of such profound misery that he pushed the guilt aside. He sterilized his skinning knife in the flames. He had a bottle of whiskey, T.W. Samuel's, a luxury he couldn't afford but kept for the bleakest nights, and he poured a generous amount onto a rag. "This is gonna hurt, Ma'am," he said, his voice flat. He pressed the whiskey-soaked rag to the wound. The woman arched off the cot with a silent scream, her eyes flying open, blue and unseeing. She grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her nails digging into his skin. And then she spoke. It wasn't English. It was a torrent of sharp, guttural sounds. "Nein! Lass mich! Friedrich, du Verräter! Lass mich! Hilfe!" Jonah froze. He didn't understand a word, but he understood the terror. He gently but firmly pried her fingers from his arm. "It's all right, I'm helping you. Just hold still." He gritted his teeth and went to work. The bullet was lodged against her clavicle. It was a nasty, messy business. She passed out before he was halfway through, for which he was grateful. He probed, clamped, and finally, with a sickening pop, retrieved the misshapen lump of lead. He stitched the wound closed with clumsy, strong sutures, slathered it with a pine pitch salve, and bound it tightly with the linen strips. For 3 days, she was a ghost in his house, rattling the chains of her fever. Jonah sat by the cot, forcing sips of broth and willow bark tea between her lips. He listened to her nightmares. The same words, over and over. "Friedrich. Traitor. Faster." He was exhausted. He spent his days checking his meager trap lines, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges, and his nights listening to the woman's delirious German. He felt stretched thin, a wire pulled taut to the point of breaking. On the 4th morning, he awoke from a restless doze in his chair to find her eyes open and clear. She was staring at him, the terror back, but this time it was cold and sharp. "Where?" she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp. "My ranch. You're safe, for now." "The wagons?" Jonah shook his head. "Gone. Everyone." Her eyes closed. A single tear tracked through the grime on her temple. She didn't sob. She just absorbed it. The control in that silence unsettled him more than any wail. "Who are you?" she asked. "Jonah Hale. This is my land. My name is Anna." The lie was whisper thin, but it was immediate. "Anna Kosloff." It was a good, simple name, a settler's name. But it didn't fit the face, or the German she'd been screaming. Jonah didn't challenge her. "You need to rest, Anna." He was outside, splitting the last of his woodpile when the rider appeared. Jonah's hand instinctively went to the Colt revolver on his hip. But it wasn't an outlaw. It was worse. Bartholomew, Bart. Drummond rode a magnificent black stallion, his saddle trimmed in silver. Drummond was a man who wore a tailored suit and a bowler hat in the middle of the Arizona desert. He owned the bank in Redemption Creek, the general store, and the note on Jonah's land. "Hale," Drummond called out, his voice smooth as oiled steel. He didn't dismount. He looked down on Jonah, a faint, amused smile on his lips. "Working hard, I see. Or hardly working? What do you want, Drummond?" Jonah didn't stop swinging the axe. Thwack. "Just a neighborly visit, and a neighborly reminder. The note is due in 2 weeks, 1st of November. You know I'm a stickler for dates, Jonah." "I'll have it." Thwack. "Will you?" Drummond's gaze drifted from Jonah to the cabin. "That's a prime piece of land, the only one for 50 miles that has a reliable spring. My cattle, they're very thirsty. It would be a pity to see it go to waste on you." The cabin door creaked open. Anna stood there, pale and swaying, wrapped in one of Jonah's oversized shirts. She looked like a drowned fawn, but her chin was high. Drummond's smile widened. All the amusement fled, replaced by a sharp, appraising glint. He tipped his hat. "Well, well, I see you've found company. That's a surprise. A man in your straits." "She's a traveller," Jonah said, stepping between Drummond and the cabin. "Wagon was attacked up in the pass." "Ah, yes. The smoke," Drummond said, his eyes never leaving Anna. "Sheriff Cobb rode out, said it was a massacre, looked professional. He found nothing. No survivors. Funny that. He didn't look hard enough," Jonah said. "Evidently." Drummond gathered his reins. "You're a fool, Hale. Always were. That bleeding heart of yours is going to get you killed, or worse, get you homeless." He looked at Anna one last time, a look of such penetrating calculation that Jonah felt his blood run cold. 2 weeks, Hale." Drummond turned his horse and rode away, whistling a cheerful tune. Jonah watched him go, his knuckles white on the axe handle. He turned to Anna, who was leaning against the doorframe, her face sheet white. "Get back inside," he ordered, his voice harsher than he intended. "You're in no shape to be standing." "He frightens me," she whispered, clutching the shirt. "Good," Jonah snapped. "He should. He frightens me. And he's got the power to back it up." He went back to his woodpile, swinging the axe with a desperate, furious energy. He wasn't just fighting the land anymore. He had a witness to a massacre in his cabin, and the most dangerous man in the county had just seen her. The wire was pulled tighter. The days following Drummond's visit settled into a tense, unspoken rhythm. Anna, as Jonah continued to call her, regained her strength with a speed that surprised him. But with her physical recovery came a stark, glaring discrepancy. She was useless. Jonah was a man of the earth. Eliza, a preacher's daughter from Ohio, had been his partner in all things. She could mend a fence, dress a deer, and make biscuits from memory. This Anna was different. He'd asked her to mend the shirt she'd borrowed. She'd held the needle like a railroad spike, her brow furrowed in concentration, and produced a knot of thread that looked like a bird's nest. He'd set her to grinding coffee beans. She'd complained that the Arbuckle's tin was too rough on her hands. He found her one afternoon, after he'd returned from checking the northern fence line, standing in the middle of the cabin, staring at the sack of flour and the tin of lard as if they were alien artifacts. "I was going to make bread," she said, her voice small. "And?" Jonah asked, tiredly. "I do not know how," Jonah sighed, rubbing the grit from his eyes. "You ain't no farmer's wife. You ain't no settler's daughter. What are you, Anna?" She flushed, a deep, angry red. "I am a survivor. Is that not enough?" "It's enough to be a target," Jonah said flatly, "but it ain't enough to be a help. I'm running out of food. I'm running out of time. That man, Drummond, he'll be back, and he won't be whistling next time." Her anger deflated, replaced by the familiar shadow of fear. "I have money, a great deal of money. When I get to San Francisco—" "San Francisco?" Jonah barked a joyless laugh. "That's 500 miles of desert and mountains. You got any idea what's between here and there?" "I have an uncle," she insisted, her hands twisting in the fabric of her borrowed shirt. "A shipping magnate, Rudolph Kessler. He is a very powerful man. He will reward you. He will pay off your debt, I promise." "Promises are wind, Anna, and the wind don't stop the bank from foreclosing." He turned his back on her and began to clean his rifle, the methodical shk-shk of the cleaning rod the only sound in the cabin. He felt her watching him. "Those men?" she said quietly. "The ones who—" "Who what?" "They were not from here. One of them I heard his voice. He had an accent, like mine, German or Dutch." Jonah paused. What else? They were looking for me. Only me. They called my name. They called for Anna. She hesitated. They called for the woman. They knew I was there. They weren't robbers. They were assassins. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Jonah slowly resumed cleaning his rifle. He'd known it, deep down, the professional killings, the untouched valuables. But hearing her say it aloud made it real, made it his problem. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Redemption Creek, the problem was drinking a sarsaparilla. The Red Dog Saloon was a foul-smelling establishment, but it was the only one in town. At a back table, away from the stench of the unwashed prospectors and the out-key piano, sat a man known only as Dutch Malone. Malone was a paradox. He was built like a bear, with huge ham-like fists, but he dressed with the neatness of a bank teller. His vest was buttoned, his sandy hair was combed, his eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. He was the leader of the Crimson Hand Gang, a name whispered with fear from the plains of Kansas to the high desert of Arizona. Across from him sat Sheriff Elias Cobb, a man who seemed to be visibly sweating grease. It's a hell of a thing, Mr. Malone," Cobb stammered, his eyes on the shiny Remington pistol on Malone's hip. 10 men, all shot to pieces, and the women brutal, just brutal. I filed the report, just like the territorial marshal likes. "And you found no one," Malone said. His voice was soft, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. "Nothing but ash. The Paches must have gotten them, or the coyotes." "Coyotes?" Malone took a sip of his sarsaparilla. "You're a fool, Sheriff." Cobb bristled. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Malone leaned forward, and the temperature at the table seemed to drop 20 degrees. "My employers paid for a clean job, a finished job. They paid for a body. And you, a man who cannot even keep his town's single saloon clean, are telling me you found nothing." "There was nothing to find," Cobb insisted. A grizzled man at the bar, nursing a bear, spoke up without turning. "Cobb's a fool, but he ain't lying. He didn't find nothing." Malone's gaze shifted to the man. The man turned. He had a long, drooping mustache and wary eyes. "But someone else did." Malone was very still. "Who?" "Jonah Hale, a widower. Got a failing ranch up near the Verde. He rode in 2 days ago, looking like death, buying laudanum and bandages from Doc Miller. Said he was sick, but he ain't sick. He's spooked." Malone slid a silver dollar down the bar. "And what else?" "Hale's a loner," the man grunted, pocketing the coin. "But Bart Drummond. He rode out to Hale's place yesterday. He come back to town curious. Said Hale wasn't alone. Said he had a woman with him. A young one." Malone's eyes narrowed. He looked at Cobb. "Jonah Hale, where?" "Up north, by the spring. But Mr. Malone, he's just a broken-down rancher. He ain't no trouble." Malone stood up, scraping the chair back. He tossed 2 coins on the table. "You," he said, pointing to the man at the bar. "You're coming with me. You'll show me the way." "Now hold on," the man protested. Malone drew his Remington. The motion was so fast, so fluid, it was almost invisible. The hammer was back, the barrel aimed steady at the man's chest. "I am not asking," Dutch Malone said softly. Sheriff Cobb watched, his mouth open, as the most dangerous man to ride into his territory in a decade escorted a local drunk out of the saloon. Cobb slowly sat back down. He reached for Malone's unfinished sarsaparilla and took a long, shaking drink. He was profoundly grateful that Jonah Hale's ranch was well outside his jurisdiction. The air at the Hale ranch had grown thick with unspoken things. Jonah found himself watching Anna. He watched her hands, soft, uncalloused, with perfectly shaped fingernails. He watched the way she walked, a straight-backed, graceful carriage that was completely out of place in his dusty, rough-hewn world. He'd seen wealthy women like that once, in St. Louis, stepping from a carriage. She was a terrible liar. Her Anna Kosloff alias was a garment she wore as awkwardly as she wore his shirt. The tension finally broke a week before the note was due. Jonah was packing his saddlebags, a sparse ration of jerky, a handful of bullets, and his last $5. "What are you doing?" Anna asked. She stood by the empty hearth, her arms wrapped around herself. "Riding to Prescott," Jonah said, not looking at her. "There's a territorial bank there. Maybe they'll give me an extension. Drummond won't." "You are leaving?" Panic sharpened her voice. "I don't have a choice. If I stay here, I lose the ranch. I'll be back in 4 days. 5, maybe. There's enough water in the barrel. The jerky is on the table." "No!" She moved, blocking his path to the door. You cannot leave me here." "And why not?" Jonah said, his patience snapping. "You're safe enough." "No one knows you're—" "He knows," she whispered, her eyes wide. "That man Drummond, the way he looked at me. He knows I am not who I say. And they will come. The men from the wagons. I have to go, Anna." He tried to push past her. She grabbed his arm. "Please, Jonah, I will pay you. I told you. My uncle." "Your uncle is a ghost story in San Francisco. I've got a real-life devil in Redemption Creek." He pulled his arm free, and in the sudden movement, something slipped from the collar of her borrowed shirt. It was a chain. It snagged on the fabric, and before she could stop it, a heavy object swung free. It was a locket. But it was unlike any locket Jonah had ever seen. It wasn't the simple brass or silver of a prairie wife. This was heavy, burnished gold. It was thick, and emblazoned on its face was a coat of arms, a severe, double-headed eagle clutching a scepter and an orb. Jonah stared at it. Anna made a desperate grab, hiding it back in her shirt, her face pale with fright. "What is that?" Jonah's voice was dangerously quiet. "It is a family heirloom." "What family?" "It is none of your concern." Jonah slammed his saddlebag onto the table. "The hell it ain't. I'm harboring a woman who's useless on a ranch, who speaks German in her sleep, who's the lone survivor of a professional slaughter, and who's wearing a piece of gold that could buy my ranch 10 times over. I'd say it's my concern." Anna backed away until she hit the cold stone of the fireplace. She looked trapped. He saw her composure, the fragile, brittle thing she'd built for days, begin to crack. "They will kill you," she whispered. "If they find me here, they will kill you too." "Who is they?" he demanded. "The Crimson Hand. That is what they call themselves. The man who leads them, they call him Dutch. He works for my cousin." Jonah felt a cold pit open in his stomach. This was it. The truth. "Start from the beginning," he said, sitting down heavily in his chair. "No more lies, Anna. Or I ride out that door, and you can face them alone." She took a shaky breath, her eyes unfocused, as if seeing a place thousands of miles away. "My name," she said, her voice barely audible, "is not Anna." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The simple, plain accent was gone, replaced by a clipped, aristocratic cadence, the German accent he'd heard in her fever dreams. "My name is Serafina. Baroness Serafina von Strauss." Jonah just stared at her. "A what?" "I am from Prussia. My father, Baron Wilhelm von Strauss, died 6 months ago. His estate's his fortune by law. It passes to me. But his nephew, my cousin, Baron Friedrich, believes he is the rightful heir." "This Friedrich, he's the traitor?" Jonah asked, remembering her words. Serafina nodded, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. He tried to have me declared incompetent. When that failed, he arranged a marriage to one of his brutish friends. I refused. My father had a brother, Rudolf Kessler, who was disowned for being a merchant. He amassed a fortune in San Francisco. He is my only other living relative. I sent him word. He arranged my passage. The wagons, Jonah breathed. It was not a settler train. It was a disguise. The men, they were not guards. They were Pinkerton detectives, hired by my uncle from the San Francisco office. They were the best. They were supposed to get me from New Orleans to California safely. Jonah thought of the Star revolvers, the professional defense. It all clicked into place. And the man Dutch? Friedrich is meticulous. He must have learned of my escape. He must have hired them. The Crimson Hand. To intercept me. To ensure I never reached San Francisco. If I die, Friedrich inherits everything. Everything. She sank onto the small stool, her story finished. The cabin was silent, save for the buzz of a fly against the window pane. Jonah Hale, a man whose entire world consisted of 600 acres of dust, a dying herd, and a single fresh grave, was sitting across from a Prussian baroness who was being hunted by hired killers on behalf of her aristocratic cousin. It was insane. It was the plot of one of those dime novels Eliza used to read and hide from her preacher father. Jonah stood up. He walked to the door, not to his horse, but to the heavy wooden bar he used to lock it. He slid it into place. He turned back to Serafina. "You should have told me," he said, his voice flat. "You would not have believed me. You would have turned me out." Jonah picked up his Winchester. He checked the action. He walked to the small ammunition box he kept under his cot and began, methodically, to fill the loops on his gun belt. "Jonah," she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing? You are still going?" "No." Jonah strapped the belt around his waist. "I'm not going to Prescott." He looked at her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I'm getting ready. Because if that man Drummond is half as smart as I think he is, he's already put 2 and 2 together. And if these Crimson Hand killers are half as good as you say they are, they're already in Redemption Creek, asking questions." He pulled a second rifle, an old Springfield trapdoor, from under the cot. He tossed it, along with a box of heavy 45-70 cartridges, onto the bed. "You said your Pinkertons were the best?" "Yes." "Did they teach you how to shoot?" She stared at the rifle in horror. "I have hunted fox with my father." "This ain't a fox, Baroness," Jonah said, walking to the window and peering out at the ridgeline. "And this ain't a hunt. This is a siege." The first sign was the silence. Jonah had been scanning the ridge to the east for an hour, his eyes straining in the harsh afternoon light. He'd lived on this land for 6 years. He knew its rhythms. He knew where the hawks circled, where the rabbits ran. And now, there was nothing. The hawks were gone. The very air was still, holding its breath. "They're here," he said. Serafina, who was trying to load the Springfield, fumbled a cartridge. It clattered to the floor. "Where?" she whispered, her face ashen. "On the East Ridge, and probably south, in the arroyo. They're professionals, just like you said. They're surrounding us." As if summoned by his words, a voice boomed across the ranch, amplified by the still air. It was calm, accented, and full of a terrible, patient authority. "Jonah Hale, the widower! We know you are in there, and we know who you have." Jonah moved to the side of the window, peering through a crack in the chinking. He could see them now. 7 men, 6 on horseback on the ridge, silhouetted against the sky, and 1 man, standing, in a neat vest. Dutch Malone. "We have no quarrel with you, Mr. Hale," Malone shouted. You are a poor man, a sad man. We understand. This is not your fight. Send out the woman, and we will leave you to your grief. We will even compensate you for your troubles." Jonah raised his Winchester and sighted on the man's chest. He was too far. A 400-yard shot, at least. A waste of a bullet. "Go to hell, Malone," Jonah yelled back. There was a pause. Then Malone's chillingly soft laugh echoed across the valley. "A brave man, or a foolish one. I will give you 5 minutes to reconsider, Mr. Hale. 5 minutes to choose life." Jonah turned to Seraphina. "Get away from the window, the back wall by the hearth. The stones are thickest there." "What are we going to do?" she cried, huddling down, the massive rifle in her lap. "We wait." "Wait? For what?" "For them to get impatient." He didn't have to wait long. The 5 minutes passed in agonizing silence. "Very well, Mr. Hale," Malone's voice called out again. "You have chosen. Have it your way." The world exploded. It wasn't a single shot. It was a volley. A hail of lead slammed into the front of the cabin. Bullets from Sharps and Remington rifles tore through the wooden walls as if they were paper. The window glass shattered. The kerosene lamp on the table exploded, plunging the cabin into smoky semi-darkness. Seraphina screamed, burying her head, as splinters rained down. Jonah was already moving. He crawled to the side window, the one facing the stable. "They're trying to pin us," he grunted, wincing as a bullet gouged a long scar in the log above his head. "They'll send 2 men to the back door, try to breach it while we're pinned." "How do you know?" "It's what I'd do." He waited. The firing was steady. Thwack, thwack, thwack. A relentless, methodical pounding designed to terrify and deafen. Then he heard it. A faint scrape. Not from the front. From the back. "Now," he whispered. He scrambled across the floor to the heavy back door. He took a deep breath, braced himself against the wall, and with a roar, kicked the door clean off its leather hinges. 2 men were there, just as he'd predicted. They had been crouching, ready to place a dynamite charge. They stared, frozen in surprise, their eyes wide. Jonah didn't hesitate. His Winchester bucked in his hands. Boom! The first man was thrown backward, his chest erupting. Boom! The second man tried to raise his rifle, but Jonah's second shot took him in the throat. Jonah slammed the ruined door back into its frame and dropped the bar, his ears ringing, the smell of gunpowder and blood filling his nostrils. The firing from the ridge stopped. The silence that fell was even more terrifying. "You killed them," Seraphina whispered, staring at him with a mixture of horror and awe. "They'll send more," Jonah said, reloading the 2 empty chambers. "That was just a probe. Malone's testing us." He crawled back to the front window. The sun was getting low, painting the rocks a deep, bloody red. "Night's coming," Jonah said, his voice grim. "That's bad for them." "Good for us." "Why?" "They can't watch every angle in the dark, but they know that. They won't wait. They'll try a full assault before the sun sets." "How many are left?" 5, including Malone. "But they're 5 of the worst. They took out 10 Pinkertons. We're 2 people. One of us, no offense, Baroness, but one of us doesn't know which end of the gun is which." Seraphina looked at the heavy Springfield, her jaw set. The fear was still there, but something else was hardening beneath it. The same iron that had let her watch the massacre's aftermath without sobbing. "Show me," she said. "What?" "Show me. Quickly. How to use this." Jonah stared at her for a beat. He crawled over. "It's a trap door. You pull this. You put the bullet in. You close it. You pull the hammer back. You aim. You squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. Squeeze it. It's going to kick like a mule. Aim for the center of whatever you see. Got it?" "Yes." She loaded the rifle. Her hands were shaking, but she did it. Good. Jonah crawled back to his post. Because here they come. He was right. Malone wasn't waiting. The shadows were lengthening, and the gang was making its move. They weren't riding. They were on foot, fanning out, using the rocks and arroyos for cover. It was a professional infantry assault. "They're splitting," Jonah hissed. 2 to the left, 2 to the right. Malone staying back, directing. "They're going to try to hit us from both sides at once. Get us in a crossfire. What do we do?" "You take the left. I'll take the right. Don't fire until they're close, until you can't miss. Every bullet has to count. We ain't got many." Jonah settled his rifle in the splintered window frame. He could see them. 2 men, darting between boulders, getting closer. 150 yards. 100 yards. He breathed out, just like his father taught him, squeezed the trigger. The Winchester roared. One of the men spun and fell. The other man dropped, returning fire. A bullet snapped past Jonah's ear, so close he felt its heat. On the other side of the cabin, there was a deafening boom. The Springfield's heavy report shook the cabin, followed by a scream from Seraphina as the rifle's brass butt plate slammed into her wounded shoulder. "I missed!" she cried, tears of pain and frustration in her eyes. "Reload!" Jonah yelled, firing again, driving his man back behind a rock. "Reload, damn it!" The fight was desperate. It was hot, loud and suffocating. Jonah was a good shot, but he was 1 man against 4. They were pinned. The 2 men on the right were laying down a withering, suppressing fire, keeping him pinned, while the 2 on the left, the one Seraphina was supposed to be covering, were gaining ground. They were almost at the cabin wall. "They're at the wall! The left side!" Jonah yelled. He heard a scraping. They were at the window, the one Seraphina was supposed to be guarding. "Shoot, Seraphina, shoot!" But she was frozen, her shoulder a mass of fire, the rifle impossibly heavy. A face appeared in her window, a leering, bearded man. He was raising his pistol. Jonah roared, turning his rifle, but he was too late. And then a new sound. Crack, 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 gunfire. But not from the cabin, and not from Malone's men. It was from the north, from the road. The man in Seraphina's window looked confused. He turned his head, and in that instant, his skull exploded. "What in God's name?" Jonah whispered. He peered out his window. The 2 men on his side were no longer shooting at the cabin. They were in a panic, firing back toward the ridge. A rider burst over the hill, then another, and another. It was Bart Drummond, and 6 of his ranch hands. "Malone!" Drummond's voice, usually so smooth, was a feral roar. "You double-crossing son of a bitch! You thought you could hide in my territory?" The Crimson Hand gang, caught between the cabin and this new, unexpected force, was thrown into chaos. Jonah Hale looked at Seraphina, who was staring, dumbfounded, at the battle now raging outside her window. "Who is that?" she stammered. Jonah let out a shaky breath. "My neighbor," he said. "The one who wants my ranch." He looked down at his Winchester. "And I'll be damned. I think he just saved our lives." The ranch yard had become a vortex of chaos. The pre-dawn light was grey and indistinct, choked with gun smoke and the screams of men. "Stay down!" Jonah yelled, pulling Seraphina away from the window. The fight was no longer their fight. It was a swirling, brutal melee they were simply in. "But why is he here?" Seraphina asked, her voice trembling as she pressed herself against the stone hearth. "Why is Mr. Drummond helping us?" "He ain't helping us," Jonah said, peering through a crack in the log wall. He watched as one of Drummond's men, a tough hand named Pete, shot one of Malone's men out of the saddle. "He's helping himself." The battle was a vicious, 3-way affair. Drummond and his 6 men, all heavily armed with Henry rifles, had the high ground, but Malone's men were seasoned killers. They had scattered and taken cover, and were now picking off Drummond's force with deadly accuracy. "Malone! Malone!" Drummond's voice was raw with a fury that went beyond land or money. This was personal. Dutch Malone himself had taken cover behind Jonah's water trough. He was firing with cold, methodical precision, not with the panic of his men. He and Drummond were in a duel, their bullets crisscrossing the yard. "I don't understand," Serafina said. "I think I do," Jonah said, his mind racing. He remembered Drummond's appraising look, his comment about the professional massacre. Drummond, he's not just a banker. He'd seen Drummond practice with his pistol behind the general store once. The man moved with an economy of motion, a lethal grace that didn't belong to a land baron. "When you told me about the Pinkertons, it made me think," Jonah said, reloading his Winchester. Drummond knew. He recognized the signs. The way the bodies fell, the weapons. He knew this wasn't a random attack. So he came to what? Collect a reward? No. Jonah's eyes narrowed as he watched the fight. He came for Malone. Jonah saw his chance. The two remaining Crimson Hand members were pinned down by Drummond's men. Malone himself was focused entirely on Drummond, who was now creeping on foot toward the stables. The cabin was, for the moment, ignored. "We're leaving," Jonah said. "What? Into that?" "It's our only chance. They're all distracted. The horses are in the shed. We go out the back, keep the cabin between us and the fight, and we ride for the Verde River." "But—" "Now, Serafina. Now." He didn't wait. He grabbed her hand, kicked open the ruined back door, and pulled her into the smoky air. They half crawled, half ran, staying low, using the small cabin as a shield. The noise was deafening. They reached the lean-to shed. The horses, Dusty and Serafina's captured mare, were terrified, their eyes rolling. "Get on," Jonah ordered, calming his bay. As he swung into the saddle, he saw the fight's climax. Dutch Malone and Bart Drummond had seen each other. They both rose from cover at the same time, not 10 yards apart. It wasn't a gunfight anymore. It was a showdown. Malone's pistol was empty. Drummond's rifle was too. With a roar, Drummond threw his rifle aside and drew a massive Bowie knife. Malone did the same. "You should have paid me, Bart," Malone snarled, circling. "You should have stayed dead in Kansas, Dutch," Drummond spat. The two men, silhouetted against the rising sun, fell upon each other. It was not a duel. It was a butchering. "Jonah!" Serafina screamed. One of Malone's men, his face a mask of blood, had seen them. He was raising his rifle. Jonah didn't have time to aim. He snapped his Winchester up and fired from the hip. The bullet went wide, but it was enough. The man flinched, and at that exact moment, one of Drummond's men shot him from behind. "Ride!" Jonah slapped the rump of Serafina's horse. They plunged down the gully behind the ranch, the sounds of the battle fading behind them, replaced by the thunder of their own horses' hooves. They didn't stop, pushing the animals hard, until they reached the thick cottonwood groves lining the Verde River. They collapsed off the horses, their lungs burning. For a full minute, there was no sound but the rushing water and their own ragged breathing. "Is it over?" Serafina finally asked. "I don't know," Jonah said, his rifle still in his hand, scanning their back trail. He didn't have to wait long. A single rider approached, moving slowly. The man was slumped in the saddle. Jonah raised his rifle. "That's far enough, Drummond." Bartholomew Drummond stopped his horse. He was clutching his side, and blood was seeping through his fingers, staining his fine suit. But he was smiling. "Malone is dead," Drummond gasped. "And your man?" "Most of them. But the Crimson Hand is finished, wiped out." "Why?" Jonah asked. "Why did you come?" Drummond almost laughed, but it turned into a pained cough. "Malone, we used to ride together. Years ago. Before I became respectable, he owed me my share from a bank job in Kansas, the one that got me invited to leave the Pinkerton agency. Jonah's blood ran cold. You were a Pinkerton? A long time ago, Drummond sneered. I recognized the signs at the massacre. I knew it was Dutch. I knew he was here for her. And I knew he'd be sloppy. He always was. You came to kill him, Jonah stated. I came to collect a debt. Drummond's calculating eyes settled on Serafina. She was no longer Anna. She stood tall, her fear replaced by a cold, aristocratic anger. The Baroness was back. And now, Drummond continued, I find myself in a fortuitous position, the sole survivor of the Crimson Hand massacre, and the man who saved her. You saved no one, Serafina said, her voice dripping ice. You came for your own revenge. True, Baroness, Drummond agreed, tipping his hat, wincing at the movement. But that's not the story the world needs to hear. The world needs to hear that the Crimson Hand was wiped out by a rival gang, and that, tragically, the lone survivor of the original massacre, a poor girl named Anna Kosloff, was caught in the crossfire, died, along with the brave rancher, Jonah Hale, who gave her shelter. You would murder us? Jonah raised his rifle. Not at all, Drummond smiled. That's just one possible story. I'm flexible. Here's another. The Crimson Hand, hired by Baron Friedrich, is destroyed. The Baroness Serafina von Strauss is alive and well, and very, very grateful to the man who rescued her. So grateful, in fact, that her uncle in San Francisco, Mr. Rudolf Kessler, pays an anonymous reward. A sum large enough to, shall we say, buy a great deal of silence, and a new ranch, perhaps, somewhere far from here. The negotiation was laid bare. You are a snake, Mr. Drummond, Serafina said. I'm a survivor, Baroness, just like you. Jonah looked at Serafina. He saw the calculation in her eyes. She was no longer a victim. She was a ruler. He gets his money, Jonah, she said, not looking at Drummond. And in exchange, he gives his sworn testimony to my uncle's lawyers about what he heard from Malone, that he was hired by Friedrich. He will be my witness. Drummond's smile faltered. Now, hold on. That is the deal, Serafina said, her voice absolute. You will be wealthy, Mr. Drummond, but you will also be my weapon. You will testify, and then you will disappear. And Jonah. She turned to him. Jonah's debt is paid. The note on his land, it will be lost by the bank. Drummond, bleeding, outnumbered, and staring at the woman who held all the cards, began to laugh. A real, wheezing laugh. I'll be damned, he gasped. The Baroness of Redemption Creek. He nodded. The deal struck. So be it. 3 months passed. Winter settled over the ranch, and with it, a new, quiet life for Jonah Hale. In Redemption Creek, the story of the outlaw clash that supposedly killed Jonah was already fading, as was the memory of Bart Drummond, who had vanished to San Francisco. But Jonah was very much alive. His cabin was rebuilt, his small herd replenished. The promised wire from Rudolf Kessler had paid off the banknote, leaving Jonah secure on his land for the first time. He'd even replaced Eliza's wooden cross with a marble headstone. The grief remained, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was a memory he could carry. He was mending a harness when a fine Studebaker carriage arrived, impossibly out of place. Serafina von Strauss stepped out. She was no longer the terrified Anna, but a powerful, poised Baroness. Mr. Hale, she greeted him. Baroness. She confirmed the news. Drummond's testimony had worked. Her cousin Friedrich was facing charges, and her inheritance was secure. Now, on her way to San Francisco, she had come with an offer. Come with me, Jonah. Leave this hard land. My uncle needs a man he can trust. You would have a new, wealthy life. Jonah looked at the hill where Eliza was buried, then at his calloused hands. I appreciate the offer, Baroness, but a man like me, I'd rust in a city. My roots are here. She understood. Then I want you to have this, she said, pressing the heavy gold locket with the Prussian eagle into his hand. It belongs to Anna Kosloff, the woman who died in the desert. She gave it to the man who saved her. Jonah accepted it. Be well, Seraphina. Be well, Jonah Hale. He stood on his porch and watched the carriage disappear. He was still a widower, but the ranch was his, the land was safe, and the future was a clean, unmarked trail. He slipped the locket into his pocket and went back to work. The West was a crucible. It took who you were, a grieving widower, a hunted aristocrat, and burned away everything but the core. Jonah Hale, a man on the verge of losing everything, chose to save a life, and in doing so, he saved himself. Seraphina von Strauss, a woman stripped of her privilege, found an inner strength she never knew she possessed, forged in the dust and gunfire of the Arizona Territory. Their story is a reminder that even in the most desolate of landscapes, a single act of compassion can change the course of a destiny, proving that true wealth isn't measured in gold or land, but in the courage it takes to stand your ground. If you were captivated by the story of Jonah and the Baroness, please show your support. These tales from the Old West are brought to life for you, and your engagement keeps them coming. Hit that like button to let us know you were here. Share this video with someone else who loves a gripping Western drama. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we unearth from the dusty annals of history.